So my lesson was implemented at first in school before this pandemic happened, and then we had to swap it over for digital learning. So part of this was at home, part of it was at school. But students covered these standards. They analyzed the economic systems of South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria, described factors that influence growth there in those economies, including literacy rate, human capital, capital goods, natural resources, and entrepreneurship. The essential question students were asking themselves is, when a business wants to choose a country to create a factory in, what information about a country's economy should a business consider? The first thing I had students do was complete a pre-assessment on GoFormative.com. We were in school at this point, so they could use their devices or they could use my classroom Chromebooks. An issue I ran across with this is not every time students typed in GoFormative.com did it access it. Sometimes they had to go through Google. So if I were to do this lesson again, I would probably use Canvas or Learning Management System for this pre-assessment. But students would analyze the information in here about their economy, about natural resources, about literacy rate, about capital goods and human capital to determine how they impact that nation's economy, the type of economy, and how it impacts business there. I then use this pre-assessment data to create flexible groups for the final project. After students completed the pre-assessment, they worked on this Analyze Economic Baseball cards activity I created for them. I shared this through Microsoft Office 365 with random groups of 3 students. So they had to go online and access this through their Microsoft Office accounts. And it opened up in Microsoft Online for them. So the groups of 3, each student will be responsible for one country. Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa had a country as well. And they used CIA World Factbook and Heritage to find the information about GDP, GDP per capita, literacy rate, life expectancy, freedom score, and natural resources. Once each student completed their nation, as a group they collaboratively analyzed that economic data to determine highest, lowest standard of living, and they use evidence from their cards to support and justify that answer. One unforeseen difficulty I ran into as we were doing this at school is that because this was being completed in Microsoft Online, for some reason students weren't able to type into these pretty little cards I created for them. So if we were to do this again in the future, I wouldn't have these cards, these tables set up. I would reformat this to where they would be able to type directly into it and not have to type in some random place on the worksheet. This next portion had to be completed at home due to the pandemic and digital learning, so they were entrepreneurs, and I shared an Office 365 Word document with them again with groups of 3 that were heterogeneously mixed according to ability level based off pre-assessment data. So each student was an expert of a country. They were entrepreneurs trying to figure out which country would be best to start a business and convince an investor, me, to invest in their company. To help support their collaboration on Canvas, our learning management system, I created discussion boards for each group. That way they could share their findings and communicate and collaborate with one another in this forum. Students were also able to communicate and collaborate directly on the Office 365 document itself. I just wanted to provide students options. Before they began research, they had to collaborate and brainstorm with one another about how they would go about their research. What keywords would they use? If they didn't find it immediately, what's another way they could research that question? Afterwards, each group member completed research about their nation, so they had to do information about what type of economy, natural resources, how natural resources impact the economy. Do they export or import more? How does the government support entrepreneurs? How do they invest in human capital, capital goods, any trade barriers that might impact our business? After students completed that, as a group, they analyzed, synthesized, and collaboratively used that evidence to rank the nations from best to worst place to start the business, and they justified with evidence. Then they created an Adobe Spark to convince me, a presentation on Adobe Spark, and it could be whatever they wanted on Adobe Spark. So students could come in here, they could create a collage, a web page, a slideshow, a video, whatever they wanted. So this portion, this final project, I felt like was a really effective way of getting students to compare and contrast the economies in a meaningful way, which I always struggle with. So I wouldn't change anything with this final project, and I had a rubric students used in order to grade, so they knew their expectations and how to create and analyze and use evidence in order to compare and contrast and rank the nations. The only thing that I believe would improve this lesson is not doing it asynchronously as a part of digital learning. It would be much more effective to do in a classroom setting. I could respond to students in real time instead of communicating asynchronously through discussion boards and emails, because students and I don't always read and respond to those immediately. So I believe this would be more effective in a classroom setting instead of asynchronously like we did it here. But students did a great job for the most part for their first time doing a great group project away from school.